Hello and welcome back to the madhouse that is the current situation with the coronavirus, the lockdowns. I hope you guys are enjoying your Saturday. Well, it's Saturday here. It's still Friday in most of the world, of course. I'm Frantz Kantor. I'm a cartoonist, illustrator, animator, teacher. And I'm doing a drawing today. I'm doing a caricature of an Australian actress. This is her. Her name is Abigail. Her second name is Rogan. She's a British-born actress who starred in a show called Number 96 in 1972. And in the 70s and 80s, of course, she was in a lot of Australian television shows like Sons and Daughters and things like that. She's a very interesting character, and we'll talk about her. She's a very iconic. She's got this sort of pouting, sultry look, and she's sort of like a, what would you call her, a sex star, like a Bombshell, whatever, very sexualized characters she played on screen. This is like an advertising campaign, so that's how she was used in advertising, of course, in films like the Alvin Purple films, and a few other bits and pieces. So she's very iconic because she had that sort of, with the blonde hair and the mascara, of course, the kind of very 1960s Europe. So you're looking at like the tail end of the Brigitte Bardot appeal. So she's very, very interesting. This is her, I think more recently, she put out a tell-all book, of course. It's more photographs than writing, I think. This was the show, of course, Number 96, that rocketed her to fame. Of course, she was like a Channel 10 star. This is her in more recent times. She's a very beautiful woman, very striking eyes. She's got very dark grey eyes. This is her with Benny Hill. So she's this was the Number 96 publicity train to help sell the show. So the show was essentially a nighttime soapbox serialized drama. I think it was on about 2 or 3 nights a week. Very low budget. And the stories were really sensationalized. They were intended to be like what they call water cooler discussions. So, there was recently, I think, a censorship overhaul in the early 70s, and nudity was allowed to be shown on TV. So they went for it, and they created a show. Interestingly, though, she was in, I think, the first season, and she dominated the show. The publicity machine generated around her, principally her. She became the Number 96. So there was a lot of stuff resting on her shoulders. Not the least of it, of course, the idea of you being a commodity, like a sexualized commodity. Okay, so we're going to do a little caricature of her. I've done a thumbnail sketch, try to basically understand her forms, her features, what makes her unique. Obviously, her arched eyebrows, in a lot of these affected sort of poses. She's got this long blonde hair, of course, but she has these very big cheekbones, very big cheeks, and that makes her look very cute. So you've got big eyes, small mouth, small nose comparatively, big cheeks, and these are combinations. These are things that make the appeal. I think the general appeal of the character come out more. So they become very iconic. So if you think of, say, Brigitte Bardot, you could probably just caricature her just by her tousled hair and her sultry mouth. Let's try to get. So it's sort of like a tousled hair, maybe some eyelashes, long eyelashes, because she wore a lot of mascara, and a sort of a tousle, like a very iconic mouth. So that would be, and if you put a beauty spot, of course, that would be Marilyn Monroe. So they're kind of using symbols in a way for features that are regularly iconified and perpetrated through media. So whenever they did publicity pictures, they would have that look, they would have that pout, they would have that, the half-closed lidded eyes or something, like they're a bit tired. They'd have certain expressions that they would hold for the camera. So it's kind of trying to keep this icon of a feature, almost like a symbol, like a logo. And there's a lot of, I would imagine that it would be very, very difficult to sustain, certainly over a long period of time. So, what have we got here? We've got a very interesting, because of these iconic features and expressions, the arched eyebrows, the heavily lidded eyes, the mascara, the pout, right? We're dealing with that because we're doing a caricature of her in character, as it were. Not a sweet sort of look, or a shy look, or a pensive look, or a interesting, haughty look. So it's kind of like within using the symbols that the character's known for. That's what we're trying to do, because we're trying to create a likeness, in essence, a caricature. Let's go back to the picture that we're using. I kind of like this because she had these long hair extensions, and they were tied up, so that created this sort of helmet look with the hair escaping, of course, around her cheeks and things. So that's kind of an iconic look, I think, and I can probably do quite a lot with that. So let's try and see what we can do. This is obviously, it's a publicity shot, so it's very well lit. But you're probably looking at a light source that comes in from the top right. So you've got shadows that form at the bottom of the form of the face. So if we were to do a quick sketch of how I'm looking at exaggerating this face, this head, right, and then shade it, it would be something like that. Okay, so this is interesting because when we're drawing, of course, you need to keep that in mind. It's always, a relevant part of the drawing process to make sure that the shadows always come in from the same direction. It's very important to keep that, keep aware of that, be aware of that as a thing. Otherwise you'll have shadows going in all different directions, and of course it won't gel, it won't sort of come together in a unified way. The other thing is too, we're going to be concentrating in the face area of the head. Obviously, we're looking at the dialogue, if you will, the relationships between the eyes and nose and the mouth. So part of that is the distances, the shape, the angle. We're also looking at essentially a head that is rotated away from us. So it's not looking at us. The head, it's not facing us. I mean, the eyes are looking at us, but the head is rotated away from us, and it's also tilted down, so that there is a perspective acting on the forms. All right, so let's. I've actually taken the time to sketch up very roughly this thumbnail. It's a rough thumbnail onto the toned paper. We're using Strathmore multimedia type of pads, and they're going to be our savior, because they're going to, what it is, it meets us halfway. So when we're doing a tonal drawing, we're using white pencils and black pencils, etc. So that means we've got the ability to draw light as well as shadow, which is very important. We've also got paint pens as well to kick up the contrast a little bit for us, which is going to be a lot more fun. All right, so let's start. Now, the reference material for this is a couple of things I'd like to point out. The reference for this, of course, is very low-res JPEG, so we're going to have trouble reading the forms a little bit with that, and hence the likenesses may be hard to achieve. But I think the royal we is going to have some fun drawing Abigail from number 96, whose name is Rogan, Abigail Rogan. So, okay, let's try to get some of these shapes in. Now, I'm going to draw in with the brown pencil just to continue darkening some of these rough forms that I've taken the opportunity to throw down. And I'm there's a few things happening with the photograph. Obviously, the photograph's very low res, so I'm interpreting form. I'm interpreting detail. So that may work for us. It may not. You may interpret it wrong. That's just something that comes with the territory, unfortunately. So you have to, I think, rely on your knowledge of anatomy in order to not just draw what you see, but also draw what should be there rather than what you see there. So it's kind of a compromise between reality or the photographic image and your interpretation of what you see there. Okay, so when you draw forms, eyebrows and things, think of the distance, think of the width. You're obviously with a caricature, you have a little bit of leeway with shape, size, and etc. But try to keep the dialogue happening. The angles of lines have to be true to the material. Okay, that includes like the part of the eyebrow that actually goes down. So earlier I did a lot of rubbing out on this thumbnail, but I had the eyebrow basically, angled down halfway up, which is wrong. It's giving the wrong impression. So it should be more like that. So that's how I've corrected it. Her eyebrows, thankfully, are quite thick. So I think I'm quite happy with the details that I can see from some parts of the photograph, some parts of her face. Definitely the eyebrows. So it's very clear on, what the angles are there. She is very interesting. This was a period, the early 70s, 1972. So there was a lot of 1960s hangover in terms of fashion and makeup and things, and definitely she had part of that with the you know, the frosting on her eyelids, etc., and the extensive use of these long false eyelashes and hair pieces, etc. So there was none of the severity of, say, the late 70s, where you have these very, very thin eyebrows and, you know, mullets, that's like tails, thin tops and long cascading backs, haircuts for men and women. I think they call them mullets on women as well. So it's got some lovely shapes, very beautiful eyebrows, beautiful head, beautiful cheeks, very strong cheekbones. You know, this is a very well presented actress. So she's got very good features and, you know, good cheekbones, nice broad cheekbones, soft features, soft face. Her nose is not pointy or straight. It has a little bend in it, you know, but it is quite small. It's got a tiny little ball at the end. So everything is very, very much in proportion with what you would expect from a sort of a classic dolly bird type of look. Dolly birds is sort of something that, you know, it's kind of like caricatured or cut, very symbolic features, you know, eye makeup and hair. So very much part of a culture. So it's not like the, you know, the beach culture like Brigitte Bardot. It's sort of more of a groomed, mini-skirted look. And again, you know, harkening back to the 60s, it's not, even though it's 1972, that sort of effect was very prominent in the 60s. You could basically, you know, walk into a boardroom and there'd be someone wearing a miniskirt, or you could walk down the street and someone wearing a miniskirt. So it's very universal. It's not sort of something that is particularly derived at an age, or, you know, what I wanted to say. She fit the part, but, you know, perhaps not classically. Early 70s, yes, but classically not in the later part of the 70s. So that style would have to be changed. I think in the later part of the 70s, she had like a perm, which is, you know, that was a thing then too. But I prefer this this style because I think it's a little bit more iconic and doesn't tend to sort of blend more into other periods of time. So, yeah, I'm going to take it a little bit easy. I'm going to slow down a little bit here because there's a lot of things that I'm very scared of losing control over. Because with heavy eye makeup's intended to disguise form, and I need form underneath. I need to know what's going on in order to draw. So it's going to be an interesting pencil story in a way. She has dark eyes, but they're grey. So there is a little bit of colour. In the irises. The irises are not that. They're dark, but they're not chocolate like mine. They're not really dark. So it's an interesting thing to try to find form under this disguise. I mean, you can exaggerate. You know, there are false eyelashes, obviously, so you can exaggerate them, and also build up the eyeline, the thickness of the eyelash line itself. Obviously, with mascara, it's designed to do that. It's to make the eyes more extreme, to stand out more, which is good, but we also need to know what's underneath so that we can better draw correctly as we can. Keeping in mind, of course, this is a caricature, so even drawing correctly, I am changing some of those rules as I go. So caricature is really interesting. It's based on observation, interpretation of what you see, and exaggeration. So you're actually creating a new form of rules applied to the forms that you're drawing. So there's a few things happening in her eyes which I think we can kind of build back in. Some reflections, even though her eyes here are white in the reference. Eyes don't look right if they draw them white. The sclera, you know, the white of the eye, doesn't quite look right because you're taking away a lot of the detail that the reflections provide. So I'm putting a few elements of form around the eye which I know have to be there, even though they're not as strong. Can hardly see them at all. Also, there's a curvature of eyelashes too, which we need to be aware of. So, just to explain it a little bit clearer, you've got the eye here that does this, then you've got the edge of the upper lid. So if this is the upper lid, this is the edge of the upper lid. That closes over the eyeball, okay? So this is how thick the skin is, right? So the real eyelashes are attached to this line right on the edge here. Now false eyelashes are obviously glued on that line just above it. And they have this curve, right? So when you're drawing curved eyelashes, you have to draw the curves, but you have to draw the curves in the correct perspective, knowing how the eyelashes are attached to the upper lid. And it's the same for the lower lid. So you allow the thickness of the skin, and then the eyelashes have a pattern. They have a position or a growth pattern and a curvature. Each one has a curvature. And then, of course, there's the lower lid, which bulges over the eyeball. All of this, of course, bulges slightly over the eyeball, which is sitting in the socket. All right, I hope that helps explain some of the things that we're looking for. We're looking to try to create, even if it's, as I said, even if it's not there. You have to look for it. You have to try to find it like a detective. That's what you're doing. You're a detective here. And these are the fingerprints. This is the DNA. This is the evidence of who done it. So who done it? We have to be careful. You know, lines are not... lines can sometimes be deceiving. Now, interestingly, with this photograph, I've actually had to look at another series of photographs to find out a bit more information about her lips. Because her lips are parted in this one. So she has a pout, right? This is her pout, which means that her lip has this, I don't know what that is, a punum, I don't know. It has this dent, right? And when the lips are pursed, in other words, they pinch together, they form that line. You can look in the mirror and do that same expression. So that's a pout. That's a sort of like a ooh sound, right? Ooh. Okay? And God knows why, but that's a thing that models do, and it's like a trope, you know, a pouty look. Boop boopy doop. Sort of comes from, I think, the Flappers from the Betty Boop age in the 1920s. Now when you look at her face later on, you can see that she has the line, and her lips are very small. They're beautifully formed, but they are small. So that's what we're going to try to build as well when we're working from that reference. I can't zoom in on it because it's really, really pixelated. It's not a very good photograph at all. I think there's a tendency for the top lip to be a different proportion than the bottom lip, and there's also the mouth is in perspective, right? So it's not evenly placed. It's towards the right hand side of the face in our drawing. So it is a bit slightly smaller than the bottom lip. So even though she has these sort of trope expressions, you know, she's very beautiful, and they are within a sense of proportion that helps us to create a recognizable set of expressions, of shapes that relate to her, I think. This is in very low form and line, of course, at the moment, so you know, if it doesn't look exactly like her, keep that in mind. There's still quite a bit of work to be done. Okay, so let's continue on. I think this is the hair behind the head you're looking at, and then there's a tress that falls down this way, and we're going to try to give a bit of definition here and there. Maybe have some hairs from the back that fly across it from behind, perhaps create a bit of difference. Here's a very interesting thing to draw. So just trying to get something happening here that makes sense. Okay, so far so good. I don't think the likeness is there yet. We may lose it, we may build it up with other pencils, but I like the form, the way things are happening, so who knows? It may work, may not. We don't know. I'm quite happy with how things are going with the shapes. I think it seems to be okay. There's also, you know, even though they're not there, you have to think of structure, because everything, you know, the bones and the muscles and the way things are the way elements come together on a face, they always have a relative similarity. So you're looking at a difference in some proportions here and there. I'm just trying to think if I can very lightly bring in. No, it won't work. Oh, I was going to put some of the forms that I see in her later photographs, but I've just realized that that's probably going to throw me off. All right. Let's try some black pencil, then we'll get some white pencil in there. So usually black pencil is used for like definition, stronger, more harsher definition. So the darkest part of the image, usually the pupils and the eyelashes, etc., and then build out from there, so that you keep everything relative in terms of light and dark. Now, the photograph is quite stylized, so I'm going to try to approximate the effect of the mascara, but hopefully not destroy my sense of form that I'm trying to get also in the picture. So I'm partly looking at the photograph and then trying to correct what I see in the photograph itself. That makes sense. Photographs don't really have the whole story in terms of for portraits or caricatures for that matter. They're handy, but they can only capture so much. So a lot of it they hide. And, you know, the makeup is designed for photographic reproduction, this makeup. So it's quite heavy and clunky and gluggy, I think. Very, very thick. This was designed for photographs, which are not very detailed. They don't show a lot of the detail itself. It's like wearing pancake type makeup on stage, you know, to try to flatten the forms as much as you can, because it's part of the style that you want to project, a theatricality, a form of stylization. And that's what's happening with her face. So, you know, there is that sort of dialogue going on. She's got grey eyes, but they're very dark. So we need to get that in there as well. Now, even with a blurry photograph, you need to anticipate hair direction, like eyebrows, eyelashes. So sometimes they're not as obvious in a photograph. Okay. So a lot is hidden with makeup, you know. It's a lot of work trying to find where the lines are supposed to be. And you might think, well, just draw it, it's in the photograph. And, you know, if you're a filter, you could just do that. Good luck. But trying to create something that has a little bit of more involvement than a filter. Because you actually learn a lot about the structure and the details. It's all in the details with character, personality, expression, and things like that. So she's got like a very iconic look, which doesn't seem to tell you much about her character. But there is a lot of this. There is a lot of meaning in some of the micro expressions that she has. Some of the smaller detail, less detail. Let's get this rubber. Repair this thing once and for all. So there's a bit of subtlety, even though there's some stylized makeup and, obviously the expression of the raised, the arched eyebrows and half-lidded eyes give you an expression of like distance or haughtiness, perhaps. There is still quite a lot of the story of Abigail coming through. So I'm trying to get the right amount of her iconic 70s, early 70s look, with the shine obviously on this eye makeup, sort of a metallic light shade that they used to wear. Which is kind of a more subdued version of the extreme, twiggy look from the 60s, the mid-60s. So this is the mid-70s or early 70s, so you still get that same makeup, but now it's a little bit more softened, subdued, for an audience that's already seen that. It's like, in the 70s, early 70s, there were still flares. And I had a pair of flares. And my mum made me a pair of flares. Oh, no, she bought me a pair of flares then. But in the mid-60s, I was a little kid. And she made me a pair of flares because they weren't in Australia at that stage. Or if they were very expensive imports or something. So they were still around in the mid-70s, early 70s, but they changed slightly. They'd softened. They weren't so extreme. So they're more like you could buy a business suit, for example, with flared legs. That was perfectly acceptable. Whereas in the 60s, I guess, they were still operating under the dress code of the 50s, or the late 50s, say the late 50s, where everything, thin stovepipe pants, mid-waisted rather than the high waists of the 40s. So I've been watching Penny Dreadful, a new series based in the 40s, and the fashion, like zoot suits and all that sort of stuff, was really very severe, very incredible. But of course, it went on to influence some of the fashion, like lapels and stuff like that, in the rest of the culture. Okay, that's nice. let's continue on, shall we? That might work. All right. I might just why don't I, just for fun, why don't I just darken this with a pen, with a brush pen, and see what effect I can get? Because the idea is to create the same look, the same sort of effect, severity, I guess, sort of make it stand out from the rest of the face, the eyes, which is the intention of the makeup style. I'm just sort of helping it along a little bit. Remember the curvature of the eyelashes, even though they're fake. So it's like doing her makeup. I'm just done her makeup. Okay, let's. What do we do next? I know what we'll do. We'll try and build up a little bit of highlights in her eyes itself. I think that might be kind of fun. So even though the photograph's very blurry, I'm going to put in some reflections that I think kind of will make sense for me. And hopefully it will work. But then you know what? It may not work. It's just the luck of the draw. But I'm learning quite a lot about Abigail from this. This is a very intelligent woman. So she turned her back on, I think towards the end, she turned her back on appearances and TV shows and things like that. Even though she was quite a respected actress, she sort of ducked the limelight. Which I think, is probably a good idea in the end, because there's a lot of pressure on women to remain young. And of course that's an impossible thing to do for anybody, but for women it's almost like an unforgivable sin to grow old, especially in front of your very eyes on television, for example. So I guess the opportunities for acting, Australia is such a small market anyway, they would have dried up. So it has a very ephemeral nature to it, I think. The show is extraordinary, number 96. It was obviously intended to be racy and push all kinds of envelopes. It tried to, almost like it was trying to dare the censor to ban it. Of course, the censor never banned it at all. I think by that time the censor was like asleep at the wheel, perhaps, or they just resigned to the fact that, it's a sexual revolution, and that's that. We're not going to return back to the 50s, thank you. Because they had a censor for years that, for example, censored all horror films, so I couldn't see any horror films in Sydney. They weren't available. So growing up, had no horror films. Then I think in the mid 70s, I think 1974, when Exorcist came out on the cinema, then a lot of films, were allowed to be screened. So, a lot of horror films like Romero's Night of the Living Dead, I got to see in a horror film festival, which was all the rage at that time. People looking at the news, in Australia anyway, the new idea of horror films, or in Sydney anyway. Ooh, that looks interesting. What else have you got? So we'd go to midnight to dawn screenings of Universal horror films. I'd sneak out on a Friday night, and it'll be like a all-nighter. Go to the cinema to watch horror films all night. I just sneak out and do it. Sometimes I would meet my friends if they were brave enough to brave the night, the cold, to see horror films. But I don't think there was nobody really as interested in horror films that I was, to the extent that I was. So it was not. I think it was something that they used to do on the odd occasion, but it wasn't. They didn't go out of their way to do it every single time. Of course, I just couldn't get enough of horror films. So in the 1970s, 1972, when this show number 96 was on, everybody used to watch it. It was like, the water cooler conversation the next day. Or in my school, all the kids would be talking about number 96, about, well, who was nude? who did the nude scene? And, Abigail, I think, did a topless or see-through nude scene. So in the first season, and they made a big deal about that, but it was nothing. There were other full frontal nudity in the show, which she didn't do. So what was it about her that captivated the audience, Australia, and made her such a star overnight? What was it about her? What was she unlocking in us? What was this thing called Abigail? Nobody really had an adequate answer. Just said, "Oh well, she's sexy. She's," But I think she's more than that. I think she's a very strong personality, and it transcends the bimbo or the trope of the sex symbol. I think part of that is her expression. This is not a boop boopy doop expression. This is not that wide-eyed innocent look of Marilyn Monroe, or the vague bleached vacant expression of Bardot. This was something else. She had a very intelligent stare, like she knew exactly what was going on. This is, I believe, her lasting impression on us. So it's more than just the nudity or the promise of nudity, even though she didn't really do that much nudity in the show. It was her. So what was special about number 96? Her. What was special about number 96 when she left? Nothing. But she's kind of like omnipresent. She's always there, even though she's not there. She's always there. So people sort of regard it as a thing, as a a presence. She dominated the show. She made the show a success. She made the show a success. You can say, well, nudity and you know, the bomb and all that sort of stuff. No, she made the show the success that it was. In many ways, she's quite enigmatic in that you can't quite work out what this expression means. You know, but you are aware that it's something very intelligent. It's not the same expression that you see in Marilyn Monroe or any sort of iconic symbol of a sex siren, sex symbol. That's what it was, a sex symbol, yeah. Sometimes forget what the word is. So it's a complicated thing, sex symbols. It's something that no one can live up to. Obviously, it killed Marilyn Monroe. I think it's something that, you know, because there is no eternal youth, unless you're a vampire, there's no eternal youth. So the idea of sex symbol doesn't really... It's counter to... It's counter to Mother Nature. It's against the laws of the universe. That's basically what it is. It is against the laws of the universe. So no one can achieve it. So, you know, what happens to women and men, but mostly women, when they grow older? They, you know, take on older roles, you know, as mothers and grandmothers type of characters or something. Or old, pathetic, sexy women, you know, like Diana Dawes or something, or not that she's pathetic, but, you know, it's like an older version, Shelley Winters, an older version of a dolly bird that's grown older and now should know better, but still pretends that time is not marching on. I'm constantly amazed how well pencil describes hair, you know, the texture of hair. So I tend to draw hair in a sort of a ribbon formation so that they're clustered together in lots. I find that makes a better hair impression. So you don't have to draw a lot of individual hairs, you just draw the spaces in between the ribbons. And just put a little bit of texture here and there. Also, she's got long blonde hair, so we're going to be a bit careful with the black pencil. The black pencil can be quite severe. So I think we've got some nice tone happening in her face, and we need to help that, not hinder it, by drawing attention away from her beautiful expression. What makes a woman beautiful? Is it the combination of all these things, expression and the details, the position, the relative proportions of elements of her face? We don't know. It's probably all of these things. There's no real answer. But it's definitely, it's telling you something. Because humans read faces. That's what we do. We read each other's faces. That's how we know whether someone's angry or happy or whatever. but also we read micro expressions, which are a little bit hard to articulate because they have multiple meanings. But we're fascinated by the duality of it. We're fascinated by that very nature of the multiple meanings of these expressions. So what is this? Is a haughty distance, you know, the raised eyebrows and the pout. What does it actually mean? You know, we don't know. It could mean many, many different things. And you know what? At the end of the day, I think that, in a nutshell, is why she's interesting, because you don't really know what's behind those eyes, but you just have a feeling there is something there. And I'm telling you that she's a very, very sharp cookie. She's a very intelligent woman. So definitely not the bimbo. Definitely not the bimbo. So whatever the meaning of, at the end of the day, you know, a sex symbol is, it's an unattainable quality, perhaps. I don't know, but the end of the conversation is always about the person, about the what's going on here. What is this person actually saying? What is this expression saying? What is this this look? Because that's how we communicate. We communicate with these looks. So what is she trying to communicate? She's trying to communicate something, but it's sort of enigmatic. It's a puzzle. And that's interesting. And that is why she was so popular. Because you couldn't discern or you couldn't put baby in the corner. You couldn't discern, put her down or box her, regard her as something other than herself. She is at one unique in the universe, and not easily symbolized or simplified or explained, which I think is a fascinating quality. So I've drawn a lot of actresses, and I love drawing horror actresses in particular, although Abigail hasn't done any horror films. I don't think she has. I have no doubt that she has range to cope with that genre. So this is the back of her hair, okay? So, you know, that's why that's why it's darker. There you go. This is the inside of the back of the sheet of hair. All right. Okay. Try and take this down a little bit. All right. Let's try to get some more What am I going to use here? Let's try this. This is another paint pen, but it's a brush. Let's try to make it flexible. Get some paint coming out of the brush. It has to be constantly activated and dries very quickly. But it has a softer brush effect, so thick and thin quite adequately, as you can see. I think we'll put a little bit of a reflected shine coming in from the outside the left. Now she's got a lot of metallic eye makeup, so I have to make sure that works. Yeah, kind of. So far, so good. There's a bit of reflection coming into her forehead here, a little bit of shine here and there. So I'm not colouring in, I'm just sort of putting in a little bit of shine just to help get the textures that I want. Some of the highlight accents. Just wearing a metallic lipstick as well. Okay. I'm really in love with these eyebrows though. Good on her for not thinning them out, because they've got a lot more meaning. They're holding a lot of expression. Let's put some elements of shine. So I'm not colouring in with this, I'm just helping out here and there some accents, not all over the place, just here and there. Be careful about overemphasizing these highlights, you know, the whites, because if you overdo it, it becomes, see, I've overdone that, so it becomes difficult to control. Let's fix that. Let's get the black pencil back there. If I dare put a black brush here, get some of those contours. Exaggerate them a little bit, sort of, just to help out. Okay. All right. Well, it's working a little bit. I don't know if I've got her likeness absolutely down, but she's very, for what I've got here, I think it's very interesting. So her likeness is based on the elements that you see, and also based on a lot of the elements you can't see. So it becomes a slightly difficult task to create a likeness, because you've got to balance, especially in caricature, you've got to balance a whole lot of things, a lot of elements. And you may exaggerate the wrong thing. You know what, I think there's some shine here. It's not in the photographs. It may be throwing me off a little bit. Also, I think the shadow here, even though the form should have it, I'm going to knock it back a little bit. What's going on here? Okay. All right, so let's push on. I'm going to put some, in the framing area around her head, I'm going to put some colour. I'm just trying to think. I'll try black. I'll try using black. So I'm going to lean on this and be very careful. Let's not risk it. We'll put barrier paper in between, because I need to get over onto the left. In order to do that, I've got to lean on the drawing. So it's always a good idea just to err on the side of safety. Why not? This is a brush pen. This is a Zig brush pen. So the ink is in the handle, and you squeeze it out, and it goes into the brush. Just squeeze it and push it. It's running low on ink. I think it might need a new cartridge. The handles are cartridges. Okay, it seems to be alright. You know, I've made her hair smaller to accommodate the size of her face. So there is a little bit of a difference in proportions, because she does have this very big hairpiece that increases the top bulk of her head. So I've actually reduced that to accommodate the caricature. And it does affect somewhat the recognition of her face, even though it shouldn't, by the fact that really the recognition is in the elements that I've proposed to you before, which is the mask zone, the eyes and the nose and the mouth. So this is part of the drawing process, right? So you get to the stage where everything seems to be working all right, and yet something's, you don't know what. But you know what? Her character is, you don't know what. A certain je ne sais quoi. What does this mean? It is a mystery. Yes, it is. She's a very enigmatic person, as I said. You can't put baby in the corner. Baby doesn't fit in the corner. Can't be boxed. You can't have a thing that perfectly explains Abigail. You could probably say, oh well, she's Number 96 rocketed her to fame. My contention is that it's the opposite. She rocketed number 96 to fame. And the reason why she's a sex symbol, quote unquote, inverted comma, whatever, is because she's undefinable. She is indefinable by her very nature. She's enigmatic. So she's not a true symbol in that sense, a sex symbol. She's not. She's anything but a symbol. You may think of her as a symbol. She may be dressed like a symbol. Her expression, though, tells a different story. She's much more intelligent than you would normally think. So the symbol is not an adequate moniker for Abigail. So not a sex symbol. Sexy, yes, but more enigmatic. So not a symbol. Something quite undefined. A sex puzzle. How's that? There you go. She's a sex puzzle, not a sex symbol. I quite like the form in this. I must admit, I'm quite liking this. Does it look like her? A little bit. Not perhaps not enough for my taste, but I think I said certainly in the pursuit of her likeness, I've kind of proven that it's difficult to attain. Much like the notion of her being a two-dimensional character. So, this is Abigail Rogan. This is Abigail, otherwise known as Abigail from number 96. A big Australian star from the 1970s and 80s, so 20 years of stardom. This is her more recently. You can see that she's very much she has more wrinkles and things, obviously, but she's still very interesting. She has very cute features, but she's incredibly intelligent. So this is her, and this is my version of her. You'd be the judge whether or not I've gotten some of her essence, some of her caricature, her form. Right, this is Frantz Kantor saying I will catch you on the flip side. Bye-bye.